Hey Patreon viewers, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatorius. So I have been at an arms fair today, an antique arms fair, so it's not something I actually do an awful lot. So all of you, I would imagine, will know that I deal in antique arms and armour, specifically really military swords, but I do venture into other things, and I might, now that I'm doing it full time, I might venture into a few more areas. I've done a little bit of firearms, a little bit of bayonets, this kind of stuff, but mostly military swords, mostly British. Probably the second most common nationality is French, but yeah, so I dabble basically. But I've been at an arms fair today, which I don't actually do very often in terms of trading. I normally just go there and as a punter, as we would say, just to buy stuff and look at things. But there is a good one at Kempton Park. You will have seen on the Eastern Antique Arms Facebook page, if you follow that I put some link up to the Kempton Park Classic Arms Fair. It's a nice little fair. There's a number of traders I know go there. It's relatively easy for me to get to from where I live. So yeah, it's just a good place for me to go really. I didn't sell an awful lot today, but actually that wasn't a big problem because I bought lots of stuff. Not for me, but for stock, for selling. So that's great because quite frankly, a lot of the time it's harder to find the stuff, to procure the things to sell, than to actually sell them, because obviously, thankfully, thanks to YouTube and the internet in general, I've got a global kind of audience and customer base. But actually, one of the problems in the antiques world, if you're specialised in arms and armour, is there just isn't a huge amount of it out there. So, you know, I've been working at the auction house for best part of a year, and it's very clear when you're working in an auction environment that people dealing with maybe clocks or paintings or jewellery, things like this, have tons and tons of stuff coming in all the time because, surprise, surprise, the world is full of clocks, paintings, jewellery, these sorts of things, because everybody has them, but not everybody has swords and guns, unfortunately. So the problem, the challenge as a militaria dealer, as an arms and armour dealer, is actually finding the stuff. So I was quite happy to buy a number of things today. I ended up with about 6 things, which was good. It was quite a good haul, and I picked up 5 things the other day, so I'm doing quite well. But I wanted to give you a preview. I'll probably show this on the public channel at some point, but I wanted to give you a preview of something I picked up today, which I'm personally quite impressed with. So first of all, anyone who knows about these things will recognise this sword as a 1857 pattern Royal Engineer officer's sword. Now, scabbard aside, the scabbard needs some cleaning up. What I really wanted to show you is the absolutely exceptional condition of this sword. And very often when we're looking at antiques or old things, we forget that when they were new, they didn't look like that. So, you know, when these swords were made, they were really bling and really shiny and bright. And it's the same obviously with, you know, any period of stuff, whether we're looking at Roman armour or whether we're looking at medieval swords or whatever. When they were new, they looked new. Now, in other periods, that didn't always necessarily mean bright and shiny. If we take medieval armour, for example, medieval armour wasn't always polished bright. It was sometimes blackened, it was sometimes blued, it was sometimes painted, believe it or not. And sometimes it had fabric covering. So armour itself wasn't always bright and shiny like in the movie Excalibur. Or in fact, actually at the beginning of that movie, if you know the movie, they do have dark armour, and then in the Arthurian age, they get to show the kind of that they've had a sort of renaissance of civilization. They have bright, shiny armour, but armour wasn't always bright and shiny. And swords weren't always bright and shiny. As I've spoken about many times in the past, scabbards in particular, and sometimes hilts, were sometimes deliberately browned or blued or blacked, sometimes painted, but not usually, until we get to about World War I when they started thinking about camouflage a bit more. But very often just for maintenance. So if you think about a gun barrel that is blued or browned, whether it's a shotgun or a revolver or whatever, they sometimes did that to the hilts and scabbards of swords, but obviously blades were usually bright. But this is not one of those examples. You can see this is bright gold. Now I'm going to dispense with the scabbard because the scabbard is actually has got a fair amount of patina. It's actually copper alloy, brass. But you will see that the blade of this sword looks practically new. If I just get the camera to focus on the actual blade itself, you can see the quality of etching and the sort of amazing mirror polish on that. And if we come down to the maker's name there, which is Pillin, incidentally, one of the best makers, one of the rivals to Wilkinson. So the blade is outstanding, but we actually come across blades that are in an excellent condition, not too infrequently, because scabbards protect them. They were designed to be pretty much, not quite airtight, but let's say moisture tight, so you don't get condensation on the blade. And the scabbards, although they're metal, originally they had liners of wood or leather inside that helps protect the blade. So we see bright blades not infrequently, but what we don't see so often are bright hilts of this degree of finish. And the reason that this doesn't just look like brass, as most people are used to seeing it, is because this is gilded. And it's very easy to forget when we see the brass hilts of brass hilted swords that many of these were gilded as well as being brass. So they'd make a brass or bronze hilt and then they would gild over the top of it. But gilding itself is really, really fragile. Literally, if you just get, I don't know, like leather or cloth or something and just rub a gilded area for an evening, you'll rub through the gilding pretty much. You'll certainly start to rub it away. It doesn't take much to rub gilding off brass. So therefore, when we find antique swords with brass hilts, usually they're just brass and none of the gilding remains. The exception to that is sometimes in recesses, so sometimes around the ferrule here and sometimes at the base of the guard, you get remnants of gilding remaining because it's in a kind of crevice, so there hasn't been friction, there's been no rubbing. Equally, when you get things like this checkered pommel, let's have a look at the pommel up close. When you get things like this checkered pommel, often you'll get gilding inside the grooves, but not on the high points. But this hilt, amazingly, I mean, you can see perhaps best on the inside, has a huge level of gilding remaining. And you'll notice the colour is very different. It's gold. It looks like gold colour instead of like brass colour. Brass is more, it's difficult to describe. It's just got a slightly different colour, a slightly warmer colour I'd say actually, but the gold is just brighter and more yellow. We can in fact see on the hilt here that little bits of the gilding have started to rub away in parts, but some of that is just oxidization on the surface and some of that will clean off. So I do have a little bit of cleaning to do on this. So this is an exceptional sword for a number of reasons. It's made by Pillin, who are a very good maker, equal to Wilkinson, if not quite as famous. But in their time, they were pretty much as famous as Wilkinson. The blade is superb, fantastic condition blade, and obviously it has its scabbard, which needs some cleaning. But really the hilt is the thing that is special about this. It is such good condition. And what I wanted to say to you guys is really when you think about these swords when they were new, that was at least what this model of sword looked like. Bright yellow, bright gold. Probably a little bit too gaudy by modern tastes. I know that a lot of sword collectors prefer steel hilts over brass or gilded hilts just because this is not that fashionable at the moment. I'm sure it will come back into fashion for the same reason that lots of people prefer silver jewellery or white gold jewellery to gold jewellery. The final thing I wanted to say, another reason why this is such a superb sword, is if I just zoom in on it here, you will see that as well as the actual cutout decoration in what's known as the Sind irregular cavalry pattern, there is additional hand engraved detailing. Just look at that leaf engraving. It's like something you get on a very high-end shotgun or firearm. It's very, very high quality. So not only has this guard been made in that pattern with those cutouts, which is enough work by itself, but they've actually then hand engraved all of this additional floral decoration on. So, you know, I often talk about these, well, I usually talk about these swords as weapons, and this is a decent enough weapon. But we have to remember that a colossal amount of artistry goes into these things purely for the purpose of status and showing off how much money you've got and how you can afford a much nicer model of this sword than your brother officer who doesn't have quite as much money as you. So just like all things, there's a lot of showing off involved. Anyway, I hope that's been somewhat interesting and perhaps even useful. Generally speaking, when you're looking at the value of swords, if there is a degree of gilding, and if there's a high degree of gilding remaining on a hilt, it does increase the value and the saleability of that sword quite a lot. So look out for that by all means. And also, I would also say sometimes I've discovered gilding on quite heavily patinated guards. So sometimes when you clean a guard in the correct way and carefully, you'll find that there's quite a lot of gilding surviving underneath. But you've got to do it carefully. You've got to be fairly gentle with it because, as I said, gilt does rub off relatively easily. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you soon, obviously, for another Patreon video, and I'll see you on the public channel real soon. Cheers, folks.